South Korea is disappearing. Not through war, not through famine, not through any disaster you'd see on the news. It's disappearing through simple math, and the math is more terrifying than almost anything else happening in the global economy right now. In 2023, South Korea's fertility rate hit 0.72 children per woman. To put that number in perspective, a country needs a fertility rate of about 2.1 just to keep its population stable from one generation to the next. South Korea isn't just below that number, it is less than half of it. It is, as of right now, the lowest fertility rate ever recorded by any country in human history. Let that sink in. Not the lowest in Asia, not the lowest in the developed world, the lowest ever recorded period, full stop, in the entire history of demographic record keeping. If this trend continues without dramatic reversal, South Korea's population is projected to roughly halve by the end of this century. Some economists have used a much darker word, extinction. Not metaphorical extinction, a genuine, mathematically modeled path toward a country with no people left in it centuries from now, if nothing changes. This isn't a crisis that snuck up on anyone. South Korea has known about this problem for nearly 2 decades. The government has spent over $280 billion trying to fix it. And the birth rate has gotten worse every single year despite that spending. So today, we're going to answer the question that has stumped the smartest economists. Why can't South Korea get anyone to have children? And what does that tell us about the future? Let's start with how we got here. To understand South Korea's birth rate collapse, you first need to understand just how fast South Korea transformed as a country. In the 1950s, it was one of the poorest countries on the planet. Its per capita income was lower than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The country had almost no industrial base and limited infrastructure. Then something remarkable happened. Over the next 50 years, South Korea executed one of the most successful development transformations in human history. Government-directed industrial policy and massive investment in education turned South Korea into one of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced countries on Earth. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG went from unknown manufacturers to global household names. By the 2000s, South Korea was a developed, high-income nation. This transformation is often called the miracle on the Han River, and it absolutely deserves that name. But miracles, it turns out, come with costs that don't show up until decades later, and this collapse is the bill coming due for exactly how that miracle was built. Here's the connection most people miss. South Korea's economic transformation required an extraordinarily intense, competitive, high-pressure society. To get rich in 2 generations, they built a culture around relentless work, education, and competition for a limited number of good jobs at the top of the ladder. This culture worked brilliantly for building an economy. It has been absolutely devastating for building families. Let's break down exactly how. First, the education system. South Korean children enter one of the most intensely competitive education systems on the planet, starting from a remarkably young age. Children attend regular school during the day, then go to private cram schools called hagwons in the evening, often until 10 or 11 at night. This is the norm. The vast majority of students attend multiple private after-school academies simultaneously, all stacked on top of a full day of regular school. The reason for this intensity comes down to a single exam, the Suneung. This single test, taken on a single day once a year, can determine the trajectory of a person's entire life. Which university you get into determines which companies will hire you. Which companies hire you determines your income, status, and frankly, your marriage prospects. The stakes attached to this one exam are so significant that on test day, the country effectively pauses around it. Flights are restricted near testing times so noise doesn't disturb students. Office workers are asked to delay their commutes. Police officers escort latecomers to test centers. Now, think about the economics. Parents are expected to fund years of expensive private academies for over a decade. Private education spending in South Korea is among the highest in the world. For many middle-class families, the cost of educating one child can consume a massive share of income. How many children can a young adult actually afford to raise this way? But education is only the first piece. Let's talk about housing. Seoul has some of the most expensive real estate relative to income anywhere in the world. Apartment prices in Seoul routinely run into the hundreds of millions of won, requiring well over a decade of total income, even for well-paid professionals to afford. South Korea has a unique rental system called jeonse, where tenants give landlords a massive lump sum deposit instead of monthly rent. This requires young people to accumulate enormous amounts of cash. The result is a generation who live with parents well into their 30s because moving out is financially unreasonable. If moving out is hard, starting a family is even harder. Now let's talk about work culture. South Korea has historically had some of the longest average working hours among developed economies. Corporate culture, especially in the large chaebols that dominate the economy, still expects extensive overtime and mandatory after-work social drinking with colleagues. Raising children requires something in desperately short supply in this system: time. Flexible, predictable time that allows parents to be present in their children's lives. South Korean women in particular face a brutal trade-off. Pursuing a career in many companies has historically meant choosing between advancement and motherhood. Workplaces have a history of viewing maternity leave as a career setback. Women who take leave often find themselves sidelined or facing pressure to resign. This creates an impossible bind. South Korean women are now among the most highly educated in the world, with higher university enrollment than men. These women have invested years in their careers and are increasingly unwilling to sacrifice those ambitions for a marriage structure that asks far more of wives than husbands. Even in dual-income households, women continue to perform a dramatically disproportionate share of housework and childcare. It represents a second full-time job. This has led to the 4B movement, a rejection of dating, sex, marriage, and childbirth as a deliberate response to a system stacked against women. Whether or not you agree, its existence tells you something. A meaningful number of women have concluded that the costs of motherhood under this system outweigh the benefits. Men face their own pressure. Traditional expectations place enormous financial burden on men to provide housing before marriage is considered viable. In a country with these housing costs, this expectation alone prices an enormous number of young men out of being considered marriage material by their own culture. So you have an economic and cultural system that makes children expensive, marriage exhausting for women, and financial stability out of reach for men. It's a structural collapse. We've covered why couples are choosing not to have children, but the consequences and whether there's any way to fix it are even more important. Make sure you watch part 2. In the last part, we covered why South Korea's birth rate collapsed to the lowest level ever recorded, an education system built around one brutal exam, housing costs that price out entire generations, a work culture that leaves no room for family life, and a gender imbalance in marriage that's pushing many women to opt out entirely. Now let's look at what this actually costs South Korea, why $280 billion in government spending hasn't fixed it, and whether there's any way out. Now, let's talk about what this actually means for South Korea's economy and society, because the consequences here are not distant or theoretical. They are already beginning to unfold, and they touch nearly every part of how a modern economy functions. Start with the most direct consequence: the shrinking workforce. A country's economic output depends heavily on the size and productivity of its working-age population. As South Korea's population ages and its younger generations shrink dramatically in size, the pool of workers available to staff companies pay into pension systems and drive economic growth contracts as well. Some demographic projections suggest South Korea's working-age population could shrink by well over half by the latter half of this century if current fertility trends persist. This creates a problem economists call the dependency ratio crisis. Pension and healthcare systems in South Korea, like in most developed countries, are structured so that current workers' contributions fund benefits for retirees, a system that only works mathematically if there are enough workers to support the retired population. As South Korea's elderly population grows rapidly while its working-age population shrinks, the math behind this system becomes increasingly unsustainable. Fewer workers will be supporting more retirees, which means either dramatically higher taxes on a shrinking workforce, significantly reduced benefits for retirees, or some painful combination of both. The South Korean military faces its own version of this crisis. South Korea maintains mandatory military conscription for men, given its ongoing security situation with North Korea. A shrinking population of young men means a shrinking pool of eligible conscripts, which creates genuine strategic concerns about maintaining adequate troop levels for national defense in a country that faces a hostile, nuclear-armed neighbor across one of the most heavily fortified borders on Earth. Rural areas and smaller cities are already experiencing what researchers describe as a preview of the broader national crisis still to come. Many smaller South Korean towns have seen schools closed due to insufficient enrollment, with some regions reporting elementary schools with only a handful of students total, or in extreme cases, none at all in incoming class years. Local economies that depend on a critical mass of young families to sustain businesses, services, and infrastructure are beginning to hollow out in ways that mirror rural decline patterns seen in other aging societies, but at an accelerated pace. Even South Korea's globally dominant technology and manufacturing sectors face long-term concerns. Companies like Samsung and Hyundai have built their competitive advantage partly on access to a highly skilled domestic workforce. As that workforce shrinks, these companies face difficult choices about whether to rely more heavily on immigration, automation, or relocating more operations outside South Korea entirely, each of which carries its own significant economic and political complications. Each choice carries significant complications for a country that has historically had relatively restrictive immigration policies and strong cultural emphasis on ethnic homogeneity. Now here's where the story gets even more remarkable. South Korea's government has been aware of this crisis for a very long time and has thrown an extraordinary amount of money at trying to solve it. Since the mid-2000s, the South Korean government has implemented and expanded a wide range of policies explicitly designed to encourage childbirth. These have included direct cash payments to families for each child born, extended and better compensated parental leave policies, expanded public childcare facilities and subsidies, housing assistance programs specifically targeted at young married couples and families. Cumulative government spending on these pro-natal policies has been estimated at well over $280 billion since the programs began. This represents one of the most sustained government attempts to reverse a fertility decline. And yet, despite this spending, South Korea's fertility rate has continued to decline in almost every single year these policies have been in place. The rate kept falling year after year, even as government spending kept rising. This suggests something uncomfortable. This crisis might not be primarily about money at all. If it were, then $280 billion should have made a difference. Instead, the root causes run deeper into work culture and gender dynamics. Instead, the continued decline suggests that the root causes run deeper than financial incentives can reach, into work culture, into housing structures, into gender dynamics within marriage, into the sheer psychological exhaustion of South Korea's competitive education and employment systems. It's about the psychological exhaustion of South Korea's competitive education and employment systems crowding out the space needed to start a family. South Korea has one of the highest reported levels of work-related stress and one of the highest suicide rates among developed nations, particularly among young adults navigating these pressures. Mental health researchers studying South Korea have repeatedly pointed to what they describe as a chronic, society-wide sense of exhaustion and hopelessness among young adults, a feeling often summarized in Korean popular culture and media using the term jeonse. Surveys of young South Koreans citing reasons for not wanting children consistently include concerns about quality of life, and whether they could provide their own children with a fair chance at a less exhausting existence. Younger South Koreans increasingly prioritize individual happiness, personal fulfillment, and quality of life over the more collectivist values that drove earlier generations through industrialization. Demographers studying fertility decline have long observed the demographic transition, a pattern where societies move from high birth/death rates to low birth/death rates as they industrialize. What makes South Korea extreme is the speed. They compressed a century-long transition into roughly 2 generations. The social infrastructure simply couldn't adapt. This is the deepest lesson. Rapid economic development is not free. It can be purchased with exactly the demographic cost South Korea is now experiencing if social adaptation lags behind. Countries currently undergoing rapid development, large parts of Southeast Asia, India, and parts of Africa, may want to study South Korea's experience closely and build social infrastructure alongside growth. Because by the time a country realizes it needs to solve these problems, the underlying patterns may already be too deeply embedded to undo. One commonly proposed solution is immigration, supplementing the shrinking workforce with immigrants. But South Korea's relationship with immigration is culturally and politically complicated. Large-scale immigration faces popular skepticism and limited infrastructure. A second direction involves serious labor market and corporate culture reform, actually changing the work culture that makes career and family so difficult to balance. Changing deeply embedded corporate and social norms tends to happen far more slowly than changing a tax policy, and South Korea's demographic clock is not a patient one. South Korea is already a global leader in industrial robotics and automation technology, and some economists argue that aggressive investment in AI and automation could allow the country to maintain or even grow economic output despite having fewer human workers. Automation can build cars and electronics, but it cannot easily solve a collapsing pension system, and it cannot provide the hands-on caregiving that an aging population increasingly needs. Is it possible that some societies, once they reach a certain level of wealth and pressure, simply produce these outcomes inevitably? South Korea is not alone. Even countries not yet facing fertility rates as extreme as South Korea's are watching closely because the underlying ingredients, expensive housing, intensely competitive education, and demanding work cultures, exist to varying degrees in many other developed economies. South Korea, having developed faster than almost any other nation, may simply be experiencing the consequences first and most severely. Other countries may be looking at their own future. Realistically, South Korea's population will shrink substantially. The question is no longer really whether it will decline. That outcome now appears effectively locked in. The real question is how severe that decline becomes and whether the country can find a way to make family formation meaningfully more viable for the generations growing up now. Extreme economic success can come with extreme costs that don't show up on a balance sheet until decades later, when a generation decides they cannot bring children into the system. South Korea spent 50 years building a miracle. It may now spend the next 50 discovering what it costs to rebuild a society's willingness to have children at all, and whether, once that willingness disappears at this scale, it can ever fully come back. If this video made you think differently, share it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe, because next week, we're looking at a country on the opposite end of this story. I'll see you then.